As possessed Maurice is walking down the hall, Irene runs to stop the demon, and Maurice ends up falcon punching Irene across the room against the windows. What up? VSD here, coming at you live. Today I'm introducing to you, yes you, right there, you, yes you, a brand new segment called So I Just Watched. This segment is focused on me giving film critiques on brand new movies that I saw recently in theaters. Now, this is very different from a film review. A film review focuses on giving the audience an opinionated point of view on the film and how it made them feel. A critique involves that, but it is so much more. As a film critic myself, my goal is to provide you with not just my personal take on the film, but provide you with education on the technical aspects of the film, its execution, casting, a fundamental analysis, as well as an analysis on the story as a whole. Here, you will find me go into the story briefly and canon if there is one. The technical aspects of how the film was executed, from camera shots, lighting, and cuts in the editing room. Fundamentals, as it is applied to casting, wardrobe, makeup, visual and special effects, as well as the set design. I will go over acting as to whether scenes were believable or needed more work, and discuss the physical story and emotional story if either one is present. Yes, it does happen. Also, I will point to whether politics, religion, or parts of history has been incorporated into the story. At the end, I will grade the movie with my own 5-star rating, where each star will represent sound fundamentals, technicals, acting, a strong physical story, and a strong emotional story. So 5 stars. So each one 5. Now, let's begin. The Nun 2 is part of what is called the Conjuring universe, which means that it is part of the same world crafted by the very first Conjuring movie in 2013, directed by James Wan. Since then, many spin-off films have come from it, where the source is from their own historic depiction of paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now, the nun, who is known as the demon Valak, where I will refer to the demon as Ooga Booga Bitch, first appeared in the Conjuring universe through the movie Annabelle Creation, from a photo found by the characters in that movie, which consisted of diverse nuns from a convent. Since then, Ooga Booga Bitch has made its first appearance as a full-on villain in the Conjuring 2 movie in 2016. Popularity has grown so much that Ooga Booga Bitch got her first standalone movie called The Nun back in 2018, and this movie I am critiquing is the sequel. The story of The Nun 2 takes place sometime after the ending of the events that took place in the first Nun movie. The 3 main characters from the first movie being what you can call a nun in training named Irene, a priest named Father Burke, and a French man named Maurice, aka Frenchie. I'm not making it up, he's called Frenchie. We find that they have went their separate ways. Irene, in this sequel, is now a full-fledged nun. Father Burke, who does not appear in this movie, got a promotion, and Maurice has gone off and has become a groundskeeper for a school. These characters grew from their previous experience, but it is not without them carrying some form of baggage with them. Unknown to them, Ooga Booga Bitch was never vanquished in the first film, but made his home inside of Maurice, thereby being able to leave the monastery from the first film. This is the main problem that underlies the plot of the entire film. French boy is possessed by Ooga Booga Bitch. The film as a whole, from what I see, does not focus on any form of politics or propaganda, be it left-leaning or right-leaning. In the United States, we refer to it as Democrat/liberal and Republican/conservative. Now, there may be hints of including characters that does not necessarily need to be in the film, perhaps for inclusion purposes as seen in the trend of Hollywood movies recently. But other than that, this movie centers exclusively on the religion and traditions of the Roman Catholic Church. Historically, The movie focuses on a historic figure from Catholic tradition named Saint Lucy of Syracuse/Sicily, who is venerated also amongst Eastern Orthodox, Anglican, and Lutheran religions. In the film, Lucy does not have a speaking role, but is depicted as being one who had her eyes gouged out by pagans with a dagger, where her bloodline has been sought after in terms of persecution. However, when we observe the history of St. Lucy in more detail, we find that there are several diverse accounts regarding her where eye gouging only surfaced around the 1400s. It is important to cite that she had lived in the early 3rd to 4th century. In one such account, the bridegroom of St. Lucy, named Pascasius, who was governor, wanted Lucy to make a sacrifice to the emperor, who I believe would have been the Roman emperor, which she refused to do, which resulted in her being forced into prostitution as punishment. In one version, because of this event, Pascasius' guards remove Lucy's eyes, whereas in another account, Lucy takes away her eyes herself in order to prevent suitors from coming upon her, for they admired her eyes. When Lucy died, in one tradition, they found that her eyes were made whole again before her burial, thereby making Lucy a patron saint of Syracuse. Not to be confused with Syracuse, New York, just saying. Mind you, the eye gouging torture of St. Lucy was only included in the 15th century and was never included prior to her death in the early 4th century, where there is over 1,100 years of data on her life which are inconsistent. Now, the technicals of the movie are well done. Great shots, lighting, exposure, and cuts were used together to create a lot of different spooks and scares, which creates a very appealing movie. But when combined with the fundamentals, some scenes may not be needed at all. I did not hear anything that took me away from the film, but the contents of the screenplay may be another story. Ironically, Hollywood films tend to, at times, for the first scene, show the audience a prequel of what is about to happen, which is like having a story told before the story. In other words, it's like watching another trailer, and at times it gives the audience too much information when all of this could have been found out through the character's discovery. For my taste, it's better to focus on the main characters and their story instead of showing an alternative storyline that gets cut off before we see the title of the movie. In this movie, we are introduced to a boy in the first scene who works under a bishop regarding the Mass, which is the eating of bread and wine for Jesus' body and blood. Over a series of events, the bishop ends up being killed by Ooga Booga Bitch, and then begins our story. Although it is important for the narrative, the first scene is better to be used as discovery. Get to the point, show the main story, introduce the characters, and focus on the main storylines. Do not focus on side stories that almost becomes a movie in and of itself. Now, within the first scene, before the main movie begins, Ooga Booga Bitch kills the bishop by levitating him and then setting him on fire with magic powers to be turned into charcoal. Literally, he's burnt to a crisp in front of the boy who works under him. This is the biggest red flag ever, because if you have this kind of ability, then there is no reason why you should have ever lost or will lose. This is an ultimate power display, and it causes me to question everything due to power scaling. It is unclear as to whether this boost of power is a result of Ooga Booga Bitch escaping the monastery. If the demon can levitate anybody and set them on fire, who can fight against it when there is no leverage? There is no threat this demon cannot handle. How can you stop someone who can lift you off of the surface of the earth and ignite your body with magic powers? Before the movie begins, the boy in the first scene, he ends up interacting with two props, one being a ball and two being a glass container of what looks like red wine. As it turns out, Ooga Booga Bitch ends up kicking back the ball from the shadows and the glass of wine breaks. When you have an actor who is handling props, it becomes predictable that the props are going to be manipulated in some way. Now, a prop is anything an actor interacts with physically on screen. If there is no interaction, then it is not a prop. It is what is called a set dressing. Upon seeing the ball and the glass in this dark corridor, it becomes predictable of what is going to happen next, so the director plays around with the anticipation of a surprise instead of playing on the anticipation of what could be shown differently. When you are this predictable, then it's best to divert the audience with something with a twist, instead of this predictable sequence. The anticipation is played around with instead of being unpredictable with anticipation. Irene throughout the film has flashbacks of times with her mother, which are not needed. A flashback is only effective if the character is motivated to take action in the present day. It's like when you forget your house keys. You look around the house for them, then you suddenly have a flash of memory where you put it. You then go there, find the keys, and you're good to go. If a flashback does not do that, then it's improperly used. These flashbacks only serve to help Irene only in the climax between her and Ooga Booga Bitch, and nothing else. In terms of lines, when Irene meets with the bishop, which I believe to be a cardinal, the bishop says the demon lives, and I feel that this description of a supernatural entity is incoherent. The movie claims this demon was once an angel in heaven, so if it cannot die, why does it need to live? It's better to say that it has resurfaced, which is more proper. Their objective is to send the demon back to hell, which means it cannot be killed. Okay y'all, so there's this one character in the movie that I believe is not needed at all for this entire story. And it's the black nun named Deborah, who is really a nun in training due to her vestments. She is more like the sidekick archetype that accompanies Irene on her mission, but she adds no real value on the journey or even to the story. She is first introduced as a troubled youth trying to become a nun, not of her own choice. And when Irene meets with the cardinal, she is one of the nuns standing behind him as he discloses the mission to Irene. There is no logical reason for Deborah, who is new to the convent, to be in the same room as the cardinal with this classified information hearing this entire conversation. She only accompanies Irene by sneaking on board the train Irene is on. If Deborah was left at the convent, the movie would have taken an entirely different twist and turn of events, which would have been far more interesting. The film showed flashbacks of the previous nun movie, which I feel are not needed, because it did not help the progression of the plot in any way. It was there for the audience and not the character who was having them. There was one scene where Irene is standing in front of a newspaper stand with all this bullshit happening around her. Sure, she is investigating, but she is dealing with a supernatural entity, so I felt that she should have at least tried to escape or find some method of protection, even if it meant holding onto a cross, rosary beads, or some kind of item. Ooga Booga Bitch is known to kill, so why would you not keep your guard up? Fight or flight is real, and in that scene, Irene is just standing there watching in awe as all this shit is happening. What led Irene to the newspaper stand was her following the boy from the first scene and his friends through different roads and turns throughout the town. Obviously, this boy might have been a manifestation of Ooga Booga Bitch, but after the newspaper scene, Irene is found on the ground by Deborah unconscious. Now, previously, the two of them were trying to get checked into a hotel where reservations did not make it through. Deborah stayed behind to speak to the manager, while Irene walked outside. If you watch how far Irene traveled, there is no way Deborah could have found her within the time frame that she did, and it would have been a more interesting low point, if not the low point of the movie in the physical story, if Deborah had not been there. Later in the movie, we see Ooga Booga Bitch gaining complete control of Maurice's body just as before. Once Irene and Deborah arrive at the school, all this crap starts to happen. As possessed Maurice is walking down the hall, Irene runs to stop the demon, and Maurice ends up falcon punching Irene across the room against the windows. This actually was quite hysterical, but a better approach could have been used, unless that was the point. But for a serious situation like this, where Maurice and his two friends find out he has a demon in him that's been killing people around him, comedy does not make sense in this scene, so a different direction should have been used. at least for my taste. But it was funny. Deborah gets involved, but gets flipped. So yeah, funny, but not necessary. However, Deborah gets up from being thrown by the possessed Maurice and grabs what looks like a pipe and strikes Maurice behind the neck, and he is knocked out, but he should have been dead. Irene and Deborah tie up Maurice with rope and chains. Metal chains. But why would the demon be out cold if the demon is the one borrowing the body? If a demonic possessed person gets knocked out, why would the demon get knocked out too? If it's not his body? So the goal of this movie is very simple. Ooga Booga Bitch is trying to find St. Lucy's eyes and has been going on a killing spree through Lucy's bloodline to uncover it. For the eyes have been endowed with the power of God, which is why it is a holy relic. I'm not making this lore up, just follow along, I'm not making this up. However, if the demon is free and wants those eyes, then why would it create a death trail to be found, which can hurt its chances of obtaining more power? If the deaths never occurred, a much more interesting approach to finding Ooga Booga Bitch could have been used. Alright, so this holy relic being St. Lucy's eyes, it's hidden in the school's chapel, which used to be a winery, and the eyes of a goat that is painted on the glass reveals its location once light hits it just right. How ironic. Eyes finding eyes. Anyway, Ooga Booga Bitch has been around the chapel the entire time and for some reason refused to unearth it using Maurice's body, which makes no sense. Either the demon is stupid or this was just an excuse to create more scenes. Ooga Booga Bitch should know where the eyes are and should be doing things in secret instead of leaving a death trail where the main characters can find Maurice and the demon. So there is this girl who is a student at this school named Sophie, who has been friends with Maurice and is being picked on by a bunch of mean girls throughout the movie. Yes, mean girls. Think about it, mean girls. Anyway, they lock her in the chapel and tell Sophie the story involving a game that if she takes her eyes off the goat's eye, then the devil will get her. These girls later in the film, besides Sophie, end up interacting with a goat monster manifestation of Ooga Booga Bitch, where Deborah has to come and be the hero in this scene. The girls hear noises upstairs in their bedroom, which led to this encounter. There is absolutely no reason to incorporate the goat monster in this way, and to involve the other girls who have no clue what is going on in the first place. This entire scene just feels as if it were given to Deborah to do and nothing more. It is more of a side mission than a mission, where after all, Deborah is a side character and a sidekick. This is just a way to give Deborah some work. That's all I can see. I mean, I'm being honest. This scene was just here just to give Deborah a job, and the other girls. Just saying. St. Lucy in the film is depicted as having her eye stabbed by pagans, so her eye should not even be intact, and placed in a case. Also, how did the family end up getting the eyes if they were fleeing the city? Maurice's exorcism of Ooga Booga Bitch is not consistent with the exorcism we see from the Conjuring movies, which disclose this case, as well as the end of the first Nun movie. This might mean that we are either going to get a third Nun movie, where Maurice is going to be possessed again, or this was a up or it moment in the screenplay. How the heroes beat Ooga Booga Bitch in this movie was like this. Ooga Booga Bitch levitated Irene and began burning her. I saw this and I was like, well, the movie is now over. Fire covered her from the bottom up to her waist and she was screaming in pain. Irene gets a flashback of her mother, and for some reason, the plot armor allowed Irene to break the hold, which is a term used in the wrestling business. Irene suffered no burns, and her clothes were not even touched. Realistically, she should have had second to third degree burns and melted clothes at the bottom, but as Deborah said, this is a miracle. I say, this was pure plot armor polished to perfection. Ooga Booga Bitch had acquired the eyes, so it's like the demon now has 2 infinity stones in its head. All destruction and chaos were unleashed, and wine from the barrels in the wine cellar they were at were being destroyed, and it was flooding the area. Now, what happens next is the craziest shit I've ever seen. Irene and Deborah place their hands on the wine on the floor and begin to pray and recite the words for the Mass, and they literally turn all the wine on the floor and in the barrels into the blood of Jesus. I'm not making this up, they literally do that. And then the wine in the barrels burst, and then Ooga Booga Bitch got caught, burned up, and was extinguished. Believe me, I'm not making this shit up. It's very creative, but for those who are confused, the Catholics, when partaking of the Lord's Supper, which is the bread and wine for the body and blood of Jesus, they believe in something called transubstantiation, where the bread and wine actually becomes the body and blood of Jesus. So all that wine was like a nuke. If that's the case, in the movie's lore, if they had baskets of bread, could they reassemble the body of Jesus? Only time can tell. A surprising way to defeat the demon, but the other Christian denominations who believing in other interpretations for the Lord's Supper will cause a debate. Within the confines of this universe, it would make sense, even though the method is over the top. Ooga Booga Bitch should have known they could do that, but Ooga Booga Bitch just might be stupid. Because again, if you have the power to levitate people and burn them with magic powers, you should have no reason to lose. One thing I noticed in this movie is that the cardinal is sending a nun to do an exorcism by herself against the demon, where I do not even believe that would have ever been the case. Nuns are not allowed to perform certain Catholic sacraments or certain rites. Their vows are for chastity, poverty, and obedience. So why would a nun be allowed to do an exorcism? Especially by herself, without the original priest who conducted the exorcism in the first movie to be with her, or someone similar. Another note that I made from this movie is that this school, when upon looking at it closer, is an all-girls school, and the students live on campus. It wasn't clear to me whether these girls either had parents or if they were orphans. I think that could have been a lot more clearer. The acting for the most part was very convincing, although some blocking and character direction I would have done differently. Would I advise seeing this movie? If you're a fan of the franchise and want to see something exciting, then this is the movie to see. It's not excellent, but it's definitely worth the ticket purchase. In comparison, Ooga Booga Bitch in Conjuring 2 was much more frightening than his depiction in The Nun 2, and the first Nun movie was more frightening than the sequel. Dramatic elements were just better, but the sequel had good moments too. For my personal grade, if we take into account my 5-star system consisting of technicals, fundamentals, acting, the physical story, and the emotional story, I give it 3 stars for technicals, fundamentals, and acting. Not to say certain things were perfect, but even the best movies have their flaws. The physical story, for my taste, needs more work, and there is almost no emotional story to focus on, for what I can see. This is VSD, and I watched The Nun 2, and it was pretty good. Not the best, but good.